My name's Lynne Moxon. I'm a psychologist by training. I work mainly these days with young adults, 16 plus, a number of whom have been in quite a bit of trouble. It's interesting, I was talking to a colleague here this morning who said, we've known for years that this happens, that people, young people, usually more able young people with autism, can abuse, but nobody would listen. And that has been a real problem. A lot of young people with autism don't know what abuse is. Nobody's told them. They don't know they are abusing. I have young people who have been bullied themselves and so have learnt how to do it and will go on to bully. You say to them, you are bullying, and they get really upset. No, I was bullied, I wouldn't do it. But they are bullying, but nobody's worked it through with them. What I'm going to look at is some of the ways that we can prevent this. And really, it's clear, simple rules. If they don't know what the rules are, the social rules, if they don't know what the law is, they're liable to break it. They do not learn from just the world around them, like most young people do. They have to be taught specifically what's right, what's wrong. And you know how difficult that can be because of all the grey areas and the idea that they are context blind. What they can do in one situation would be illegal in another situation. That is very difficult for some of them to understand. So we're going to look at some of that and one or two other things I wish to say. They can acquire a criminal record because they've made a mistake, because they've never had boundaries put into their behaviour. We still have too many young people coming into the specialist college I work in where nobody has ever said no to them. No, you shouldn't do that, and tell them why, of course. It's been amazing. They've got to 16, 18 years and nobody's put boundaries in. They are going to get into trouble. They've not had appropriate sex and relationship education, which can get them into severe trouble, really severe trouble. And sometimes they don't really know what it is they've done that everybody else regards as wrong. But I've seen it on the telly. It's on the DVD. Yes, but in what circumstances? Consent is a huge issue for this group. And sex education, which they've been able to understand and actually know it applies to them. That their little I have autism card won't get them out of trouble. I've got too many. Oh, I'll just show this and everything will be okay. No, it won't. It will get you some support, but the criminal justice system will go through its way because there's been a victim. It's nothing to do with you, it's to do with the victim. And when I'm talking to parent groups, I always have to emphasize that. Too many still think, oh, they've got a learning disability, oh, they've got autism, nothing will happen. Yes, it will. From what I see around me, the big growth area for provision is forensic units for people with autism. So like that in your area as well, Pam, it certainly is with us. Hospital units for young adults with autism and older adults who have been through the criminal justice system or not. It's easy to get out of prison, you've done your time. It is not easy to get out of a forensic unit. When you hear, oh, he's got away with it, he's been sent to hospital, not prison. No, he or she hasn't got away with it. have actually probably had a worse place to go to. A lot of my young people, some of whom have been in prison and we have taken them on, have loved it, which is difficult. You can't use it as a threat, but I enjoyed it. People left me alone. I knew exactly what was happening. You know, I had my timetable and it never changed, and the staff were on a rota. It was good. So you can't use that as a threat for some of mine at all. They really rather liked it. And one put a brick through a police car window to be sent back because it was the best place she'd ever been. So if you are told that the place you're working is too institutional, remember that. Some of them need institutional, if by that we mean secure, consistent work, which forms a basis that they can then move forward. What else did I want to say? Children with autism can abuse other children. They can abuse their brothers and sisters. They can abuse their parents. It's not common, but it's not good when you see it. The sort of abuse I'm thinking about, one of our young men wouldn't let his father come downstairs when he was at home in college holidays. That's just starting. What about when he goes home after he finishes college? I'm working with a young man who wanted to have sex with his mother, and she wouldn't let him, naturally. He couldn't see why not, but you go to bed with people you love. I love you, Mum. Why can't I go to bed with you? He'd never been taught partner, parent. She couldn't get anybody to believe her that this would be happening. She has now, luckily, because he's bigger than she is. And I've had that start before where parents have let their youngsters with autism share a bed into adolescence. That's not infrequent. So, there's also behaviour. They see it at school, bullying, on the television, or even because they are a victim of what's called mate crime. Oh, we'll be your friend if you go and do this, this and this. What a number of those within our college. And that encourages them to break the law to have a friend. But whenever we think we have a young person with autism who is breaking the law, what has happened to them in order that they have learnt this behaviour? All sorts of things. A lot from computer games we are finding these days, copying. What's the car one that I always forget? Grand Theft Auto, I've remembered it. We have students under 18 watching Grand Theft Auto. That's illegal. And talking through that with my student group, I teach sex and relationship education on the Monday afternoon. They said, well, isn't that abusive of the parents to let them have these things? I'm thinking, you're probably right. And then they copy it, and then they get into trouble. The big copying bit I've come across with Grand Theft Auto is jumping from car bonnet to car bonnet to car bonnet. I don't know which one that's in, but there's a lot of copying of that going on. I hope they don't do 4 where you get more points for hiring a prostitute and even more points for running them over. You know, where are the role models? Where are they learning behaviours that will get them into trouble? We really need to keep a close eye on some of this. So, is the child themselves or the young person also a victim of abuse? How have they learnt this behaviour? Attitude. Really, sometimes we let things go too far and we don't make a stand with early difficulties. Touching other people, touching hair, touching breasts when they are young needs to be stopped. That becomes a sexual offence. You can be put on the sex offenders register at 14. If we haven't put the rules in by then, we can have some problems. So we have continuums of behaviour. We need to look at the early ones and make a stand then, not leave it until they're in real trouble. And there are no blurred lines. The attitudes that they might pick up from even music DVDs can be horrendous. And from things like, Ched Evans refers to rape conviction as act of infidelity. Jury found she was too drunk to consent to sex. You cannot consent to sex if you are drunk, full stop. There are no blurred lines. And this is a sort of rule we actually need to teach. I've been working with a young man who's finished university now and is out working, and he got into a bit of trouble with a young woman. He thought he had consent. She complained about him. And he said, I don't know where I'm going wrong. To tell you the truth, I didn't either. If what he told me was right. And he said, from now on, I'm going to let the girl make the first move. He's giving up because he doesn't know where he stands in some of these relationships. Another big area, autism and extreme views. Problems in managing life are to do with the autism, especially if we haven't been able to put in all the teaching that's needed to help with the communication, the social skills, all of this sort of thing. Isolation can lead to the development of a fantasy world. And that can cause all sorts of problems. They withdraw from the real world, from their peer group. I've had students who believe because they're at a certain level of a computer game, they're invincible, and the lorry won't be able to run over them if they step into the road. But it also means they can get themselves into all sorts of computer-based problems. But the vast majority of individuals are law-abiding, respect the rules of society, are actually very honest. It's those few that do go off the rails that we have to be aware of. But also, there are the group who hit their mothers and don't see anything wrong with this, hit their brothers, sisters, within the home. That is abuse as well. Oh, but I've always done it. And are now fully grown adults and are still hitting people. I've had arguments with students about that this is illegal, backed up by my other students, luckily. And it's been very difficult to get some of that through. So you get things like this. I don't know why you girls haven't been attracted to me, but I will punish you, for it's an injustice, he said. I'm 22 years old and I'm still a virgin. I've never kissed a girl. I've been through 2 years of college and I'm still a virgin. That's not what college is for. Although some films would say otherwise. For the last 8 years of my life, since I hit puberty, I've been forced to endure an existence of loneliness, rejection and unfulfilled desires, all because girls have never been attracted to me. Right, women, why have girls never been attracted to him? It's not a very attractive personality. But taking personal responsibility can actually be very difficult for this group. It's somebody else's fault. They've got to pay for it, which can lead to problems, all sorts of problems. They also need to know who does the law apply to. Very straightforward. Age of criminal responsibility in England and Wales is 10. 17 and 10, youth court. 14, sexual offenders register. 18, adult court. We've got to be putting the rules in. We've got to help them understand that the law actually applies to them. And often we start too late, especially with the more able group. Often young people with autism and a learning disability are going to have staff around them, almost mentoring them all the time in different situations. The more able group are often out there with very little support and very little teaching around these areas. And remember, they are visual learners. That says, we've agreed to move the magazines which are degrading to women out of the reach of small children. And she says, great, any idea how old he should be before images degrading to women can be? Yeah, how old? I don't know if any of you have come across Autism, Spectrum, Sexuality in the Law. Excellent book. Nick Dubin, a young American man who's written a lot on bullying, a lot of good stuff on bullying things, on the spectrum, was picked up by the FBI for accessing abusive images of children. He didn't know he'd done anything wrong. It was on the computer. Why can't I? And that's the same thing that a lot of my students, young men, all of them that I've come across, accessing child porn. Technical term, abusive images of children, but it's there. If it was illegal, Lynn, why is it out there on the computer? That's what I would like to know. But he was picked up by the FBI. Here, you'd be picked up by the police. They track them. And I've had a number of young men in this position. But there isn't a victim. Yes, there is a victim. The poor child being abused is They don't think it through. They don't think it through what they've been doing and the possible consequences. And Tony Atwood, who writes a chapter in this book about what it is that can lead a young person on the spectrum to getting into trouble, social isolation, escapes into imagination, no friends, retreat to bedroom and computers. There's a nice study from the Northeast on women with a learning disability who use Facebook. And they're so pleased they've got 300 friends. And they won't get rid of these friends even when they're abusive, even when they're asking for money, because they're a friend. I can't unfriend them. Huge area of teaching what is a friend, and it's not a person on the other end of a Facebook page, unless you actually know them. The amount of abuse from that for young people with disabilities is huge because they won't unfriend them. And it just comes, well, I can't, they're a friend. No, they are not a friend. A lot of work needs doing in that area. Social and sexual immaturity. Delay in social development, but not puberty. So they've got all those feelings, but can't really do anything with them. Don't really want a boyfriend or a girlfriend. So where's the release? In Nick's case, lack of accurate information on sexuality. Low self-esteem, because he's been abused in the school setting. And can't talk about this, got nobody to talk it through. Don't recognise some of these feelings that he's got. No peer group to discuss puberty with, because he's got no friends. Common in the group of young people I work with. But they can make friends. They can make really good friends. Hasn't got any reassurance from peers. Because he didn't have a girlfriend, everybody called him gay. That is common. I've worked with a number of young men that happened to them in school. Unfortunately for Nick, well, or fortunately, he is gay, but took ages to come to terms with that because of the idea that being gay is unacceptable. Took him ages. And if he's not getting positive and accurate information from the people who should be giving it, where's he going to get it from? Computer. Porn. Earliest age that boys access porn on the internet, find it for the first time, is 7. NSPCC. If you haven't got the right blocks on, start looking at it regularly between 10 and 11. This is up to us. And we know they will copy what they see. We know they are visual learners. And curiosity is normal. Of course it is. And we know they copy behaviour. The sort of behaviour that will get them into trouble that we have had is having sex with your foster parent's dog because you've seen it on the internet. How did he get that far in the first place? There were not blocks on it. Too many parents are not able as their children when it comes to any form of IT. And I'm not just talking about computers, I'm talking about mobile phones. Really difficult. Okay. Other behaviour that I've come across which leads to police involvement. Fascination with poisons. One of our young women had attempted to poison her sister because she didn't like her. That's abuse. Didn't work. But, well, I don't like her, so I'm going to poison her. Isn't this a bit extreme? Fire setting. One of our young men didn't want to live in his flat anymore, so he set it on fire. Saved the cat. The old lady that lived underneath, luckily, problems. Particular dislikes, babies, noise, hitting babies. We've had 2 students who put their new baby brother or sister in a black bin bag out by the rubbish, because it's rubbish. Lack of social understanding. You wouldn't think to teach somebody, no, you mustn't put the baby out in a... You have to react to some of these things. You would not teach it, but you need to be aware of that whole lack of social understanding. And then sexual offences, which we'll look at. And occasionally unexplained violence, but there probably is an explanation. It's probably something that's been going around in their heads for the last year, month. But remember, there is no difference between the ordinary population. A lot of the young people I work with are caught because they go to the police station and say, I did it. Or tell their parents that they did it, or tell somebody else. And the sort of behaviour, we've said a few times this morning about leaving school, not going to school. This one left school 13 because he didn't like the crowds. They made me feel anxious. This is what the newspaper said. What was he doing between 13 and 17 when he murdered somebody? There are too many of these young people out there without any support, without any teaching, that need to be picked up. What was he doing? After school hours, Smith, 6'1", would go to play out with children much younger than himself. When I'm working with parent groups, I say this is a total no-no. They may be at the same emotional and social level, but they are young children. They need to have friends, relationships with people of their own age. And he spent most of his day leading a solitary existence. Again, with no input. This sort of thing was his life. And if we don't put any boundaries in there, we leave young people clueless as to what sort of behaviour is acceptable or unacceptable. So that is the rule, the law, this sort of thing. But also, it's part of our responsibility to make sure they can access education in whatever way. And clearly and consistently outlining what's acceptable and what is not. And of course, some of them push against it. I would hope they would. But it's against the law to have sex or expose your genitals in public. I have a real problem with some of the flashes we have. It's impulsive. And we've done all the work and they know they shouldn't do it and they know why, but faced with the situation, which means, one I'm thinking of in particular, he was great. He's done a super catering course at the local college, local FE college, with one-to-one support, not for the catering, but in case he did something wrong. But he's now in a very restricted social placement because he hasn't stopped doing this. There's nothing we can do. And he's very upset that he can't do the same things other young people of his age can do. But it was that or prison. Sexual harassment. All sorts of things which I need to go through with my ABLE group, verbally taunting on the internet, text messages. It's often happened to them. Often happened to them. And they will use the same behaviours. Making remarks about a person's clothing, body, activities, leering. Right, you can only look at a girl or a woman's breasts for 3 seconds and you have to look away. I make up some rules. And I say, you can't do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Again, just don't know. You get into all sorts of trouble. I know people who've been put on what used to be ASBOs for that. Yeah. Sexual content. That is common for all young people, not just those on the spectrum. I don't know if any of you have got, well, teenagers, let's say 11 to 16, and what do they have on their mobile phones? I bet you they have some illegal content. Do you ever check it? And what's this rubbish about privacy? They won't get much privacy in prison, even less in a forensic unit. You are a parent, you are a teacher, you are a support worker. You're supposed to be guiding them through this. Unwelcome touching is a big one. Touch the person next to you. We're all English, some of us. Come on, touch the person next to you. We know that you cannot go around touching other people. Some of my students don't know that because they've never been stopped. And that's going to get them into trouble. You can touch somebody's shoulder and that's about it when you become an adult, except if it is a friend or family member. You weren't sat down in a classroom and told this. You picked up all of this incidentally. Young people on the spectrum don't pick up things incidentally. You have to talk it through. All of this sort of thing. Yeah, and I've got physically assaulting somebody. And what happens? This is my example. Local northeast, autistic teenager, 18, who groped 2 care workers, has been sent to a mental health hospital indefinitely. And if we don't put the right teaching in, this is what happens. So it's against the law to touch someone without their consent. This is one of my PowerPoints I use with my students, looking at different forms of touch. That person at the bottom down there is being, going through the airport. This is where context is important. A person at the airport can put their hands up between your legs, and I'm telling my students what the rules are about touch, but then we have to look at some of those other contexts. Contacting underage girls on the internet. Again, talking to one of my students, why did you keep contacting these 13 and 14-year-olds? Well, the 18-year-olds wouldn't talk to me. And you know why? Because his interests, his emotional level is more compatible with the younger girls. But it's illegal. So we have to work on that. So you need to teach age rules. You need to teach them to recognise who's a child and who isn't, which I know can be quite difficult for some young people. I can't even recognise how old some girls are when they've got their full gear on. It is difficult. But mine will ask, and they're not embarrassed about asking. No playing with children, no standing there watching children. We had a resident who used to do this. I don't think he would ever touch them, but he wanted to make sure they were safe and not going to be kidnapped because of all the stuff in the media about children being taken away. But of course, the response he got from other people when he was standing there watching children was not good. And all of those internet safety rules that they really need to know. And what happens? Kane Thomas, somebody on the spectrum, arranged to meet a 14-year-old for sexual activity. When he was caught, he said he'd been stupid, immature and selfish. But just because he's got an autistic spectrum disorder doesn't matter. Law goes through. Should not be doing it. Should have been taught not to do it. And he's got a label pervert imprisoned. That'll be with him. That's off the internet. That'll be with him for the rest of his life. And there are lots of interesting posters I use. When they mean no, when they say no, they mean no. Some men don't listen. There are lots of visual things you can use to support what you're saying. And to teach that actions have consequences. This is so important. As I've already mentioned, I have young people coming to me, late teens. Nobody's ever said no. There have never been any consequences. So when they come to us and we start putting them in, we have a lot of resistance. But we have to work it through. There are worse places you can be than in a specialist college. And they've got to face the consequences. We do an awful lot of work on resilience. When things go wrong, how do you get over it? New one for some of our young people sitting in their bedrooms being internet trolls. Again, talking through this with my students. Most of them say it's wrong. Some just say it's a bit of fun because they don't understand the impact. They don't understand the consequences. Man with AS was jailed yesterday for posting videos and messages mocking the deaths of teenagers. He created a YouTube video, lots of nasty stuff on YouTube, I know a lot of them love looking at it, but there's a lot of things out there you wouldn't want them learning from. Tasha the Tank Engine. Computer games. We now know there's a correlation between aggression and playing violent computer games, especially for young people with additional emotional needs. And adult content is harmful and inappropriate for young children. Their neural networks are not the same as adults. They're not in place. Your brain develops through what you see and what you experience. And differentiating fantasy and reality can be problematic for a number of the young people I work with. I'm glad they've started producing programs like How We Made This Doctor Who episode, which shows that it's all trickery, it's not real. Thank goodness for those, and please watch them with your young people. Gaming and going online's good. Depends what they're doing. You need to look at their age and stage of development. I use a lot of 5-point scales. This is one of my slides, adult content, to remind me about this. How are we going to discuss this so that young people do not get overtaken by pornography? You know, interest in sex is normal. But the availability of porn via their smartphone and computer, and of course most of it these days is on their phone. Most parents have got the hang of computers. They haven't got the hang of blocking on mobile phones. Awareness, sexual awareness is often higher, but it's naive and without context. That's what we need to be putting in place. And everything saturated by sexual images. But what are we looking at? A definition between soft and hardcore porn. That's the definition of pornography. Erotica, 50 Shades of Grey. How many of you read that then? Who's going to look at you? Yeah, erotica. You've accessed things like this. My concern is when that is a film and some of my students see it, we're going to have huge problems in all sorts of experimentation. And we're going to have to watch that carefully. They won't have read the book, but the visual and how it's treated, I'm sure we're going to have some problems there. And hardcore porn, which they can access on the internet. And some is legal, and some is illegal. That is there for you to check out. Widely available, though. And you know that young people easily come up with these sites without even trying. Accidental. You put in My Little Pony and see what you get. Not nice. Brony websites for young men really into My Little Pony, as a number of my students are. If they didn't tell me half of this information, I wouldn't know. I don't go and look for them. Japanese pornography in the Japanese cartoon sites that they love. Loads of it's pornographic. One of them told me the proper term for it and I've forgotten. But it's all out there. And if we don't know, how are we going to combat it? But 58% of ordinary teenagers view porn regularly. 1 in 10 view it every day. And we know it's having a huge effect. 2007, mobile phones, biggest distributor of pornography, started at that point. And I've mentioned average age and age of first exposure, very young. But how are we going to do it? Have your friends started to look at this when you've caught your son or perhaps daughter? Look, you got any questions? Don't tear your hair out and scream and say you shouldn't be looking at this, because you will never be able to talk it through after that point, and you need to talk it through. You need to know what they've been looking at, and you need to talk to combat what they may have seen. Do you know why people worry about this? What do you think they worry about? Do you think that's what normal people do? And a lot of them are looking for pictures to see what a normal body looks like. They're young adults, their body's changing. What do normal people look like? Warwickshire County Council have a good website with what normal people look like on it to combat looking at porn images. New problem, revenge porn. Sending images of your ex-girlfriend, boyfriend to everybody when you have broken up. We have students who've done that and had it done to them. Becoming illegal, punishable by up to 2 years in prison. I teach about this. They've got to know the rules. But so have ordinary young people. The number of ordinary teenagers sending pictures of themselves naked to their so-called boyfriend or prospective boyfriend who won't go out with them until he's seen pictures is huge. And I'm not talking about the autistic population, I'm talking about the ordinary population. Stalking. It's another slide. Any of these with numbers on are my slides I use with my students, and we rate how bad this is from 1 to 5 when we're working on it. We have problems with, well, how many times, if you ask a girl out, how many times should you ask her before it comes harassment? Any idea? It's 3 again. And then you stop. You might wait 6 months if you're really keen. But it's not over and over and over again. I had a young man sacked from his job because he would ask any woman out who worked in B&Q with him, even if they were married. And yeah, harassment. Because the women, it was too much. We're not having this. In real life, if you were watching your neighbours, what they were doing through binoculars, that would look pretty weird. But is it socially acceptable to look on somebody else's Facebook and see what they're doing? To me, that's also weird. So how are we defining this sort of behaviour? And just to let them know, the law has changed. 5-point scales, that's a stalking scale. I'll show you the book that's from. I found that very useful, working with some of my students. And a lot of things on here, this is from Brighton and Hove Education Authority. Go on their website, they've got loads of good things like this that we might not know about. You know, which of the following are illegal? All of them. All of them. All of them. Do we know this? Do we know what's legal and what isn't? Which of the following examples of cyberbullying and sexual bullying are illegal? All of them. This sort of thing wasn't happening when I was at school. We hadn't even got computers. So we've got to catch up with what is going on out there, which can get them into trouble. A, B, and C, all true. We've got to get on top of this. What is going to get this group of young people into trouble? Yeah. Another poster about rape and drinking and mobile phone crime. Again, using camera phones to take indecent pictures and pass them on is a crime. And that's an example which I will use of a young person on the spectrum arrested after sharing an image of his underage girlfriend giving him oral sex. Unfortunately, that is common. for young people. We may wish it wasn't, but it is. And yet, the mother found it because she was checking the phone. He's got a 14-month jail sentence, suspended, and he's on the sex offenders register. It does cause problems. Sexting, we've mentioned. Sex via technology, dangerous. Again, getting on top of technology. The legal implications. 90 children in the UK have been cautioned as a result of posting sexual material of themselves or their underage friends online or on their mobile phones. That's the tip of the iceberg. That's ordinary kids, that's not kids on the spectrum. And I do an awful lot of things about will I get into trouble, to see if they can actually judge what's going on. Relationship currency. Oh, you haven't had sex yet. Oh, you've got to. Rubbish. Teaching them about sex. Sex is not compulsory. You don't have to do it. You don't have to do any of this sort of stuff. When you get an email that says, send us a picture of your willy, you don't have to do it. But we've got to work on them so they can say no. I don't want to do that. Okay, what time is it? What I would also suggest that you look at is the Byron report for all of these areas. But be involved in your child's online life. Yes, they'll need some privacy, but as I said, there are worse things than you checking up on what they are doing. Get on top of all the IT stuff. Limits on the amount of time your child spends online. Apparently, it's supposed to be no more than 2 hours a day. How much time do you spend online? But you do have some young people who spend 12 plus hours. What sort of life experiences are they going to get? Where can they get help if they won't come to you? Again, a big problem is where to get help. If you as a parent know that they have been downloading inappropriate pictures, where do you get help from? I've come across lots of parents who have been unable to get help until they've been reported it to the police because they're worried about grooming, and the young person has ended up in trouble. And the parents were trying desperately to get help for them. That's a big problem. And for young people, do you know what happens when you get arrested? Do this with mine. And the local policeman does it as well, in order that they can not panic and hit a policeman, which will get them into more trouble. But again, we know, as we've said this morning, young people with disabilities are more likely to be abused than other young people. Some go on to abuse others. Young people with sexual behaviour problems don't get help until after it's really gone wrong. That is not good. I know of one school in Cumbria now which has been set up to deal with this within an autism population. If you can get somebody to pay for them to go. Must be cheaper in the long run than prison or hospital. If a young person is convicted of a sex crime, yeah, very bad effect. If it's downloading abusive images of children, they will have a label of paedophile. They haven't touched a child, but they will still have a label of paedophile. And there needs to be more help for young people in all sorts of ways, teaching the right skills so they don't end up in this situation. That's the social behaviour and self-management, which has the 5-point scales for things like stalking. The build one, you can look at capacity to consent to a sexual relationship. A lot of my young people would have capacity, but that's meaningless in the real world. They still get into all sorts of trouble. You sit them down and we can do the tick list. They've got the capacity, but they haven't got the functional ability to carry out what they know in their heads. So that is problematic. Going and hanging around the local bus station in Middlesbrough is going to get a young lady into trouble. But people talk to me, it's nice, because she's got nowhere else to go where people will talk to her. So what we have to do is make some other contacts that she can go to make social contact. Some sources for you, and good luck with this. Thank you.